I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate I do. St. Paul, Letter to the Romans.
There's something unnervingly familiar about this ancient confession. It speaks not from a distant theological past, but from within our own skin. We recognize this battle. We've lived it. We resolve to be better, to do better, and yet we fail. We repeat patterns we swore we'd abandon. We say things we regret before the sentence is even done. We lash out at those we love and stay silent when words are needed most. It's not just that we make mistakes. It's that we make them knowingly. We contradict ourselves, acting against our own values and intentions. And often, we don't understand why. This is not a mere lack of discipline or willpower. This is something deeper, a fracture within the self. St. Paul's words capture this internal paradox with unflinching honesty. He names the condition of being human as a kind of civil war between what we desire and what we actually do. His conclusion? The enemy is not the law, not morality itself, but the force within us that resists alignment with it. What ancient texts name as sin, modern psychology might recognize as internal disintegration, the misalignment between intention and behavior, between the ideal self and the lived one. This inattention is not a bug in our system. It's a core feature of the human experience. We often think of sin as something outdated or irrelevant in the secular world, but reconsider it not as a religious accusation, but as a metaphor for a rupture within the self, a disconnect between knowing and doing, between soul and body, spirit and flesh. What drives this disconnect? One answer lies in the concept of conscience, a built-in awareness of what is right, even when we fail to do it. The word itself comes from the Latin conscientia, meaning with knowing. Conscience isn't external judgment. It's a co-awareness. It's the part of us that observes ourselves, that winces when we lie, or that grieves when we betray what we believe in. It doesn't merely say, you broke a rule. It whispers, you broke something in you. This is why guilt exists. Not as punishment, but as proof that something within us still recognizes the good. The presence of guilt means the moral compass hasn't completely rusted. It means the internal witness is still awake. But this awareness doesn't make the struggle any easier. We say we love someone, genuinely, but we act with resentment or distance or impatience. We want to be humble, yet feel the sting of wounded pride. We know we need discipline, but cave to distraction. We want to forgive, but cannot let go. These aren't merely moral shortcomings. They are fractures in the soul, each one revealing that we are not fully united within ourselves. The ancient Hebrew term for sin is chata'a, to miss the mark. It implies aiming at something good but falling short. Similarly, in Greek, the word hamartia carries the same image. Imagine an archer loosing an arrow, only for it to fall to the side of the target. Not because he wanted to fail, but because something in him was misaligned. The tragic hero in Greek drama doesn't fall due to wickedness, but due to this misalignment, this tragic flaw. Often that flaw is hubris, an overstepping, a forgetting of human limits, Icarus flying too close to the sun, a warning not just about arrogance, but about the cost of not recognizing boundaries. In theology, hubris is not just pride, it is disconnection from the gods, from the natural order, from our own limits. In this way, the idea of sin, or internal fragmentation, is not the property of any one religion or philosophy. It echoes across cultures. In ancient Egypt and Vedantic Hinduism, wrongdoing is seen as a disruption of harmony, of the cosmic balance. In Taoism, acting out of sync with the Tao is the root of suffering. Whether we call it sin, imbalance, or ignorance, it always returns to the same truth. We fall out of alignment, and in doing so, we suffer. The awareness of our wrongdoing, while painful, is proof of our higher nature. It means that something within us still sees the good, still wants it. That very tension, uncomfortable as it is, tells us we haven't fully given in to what pulls us downward. We are torn between two impulses, one toward what is easy, gratifying, and immediate, the other toward what is lasting, difficult, and true. Aristotle gave a name to this falling, akrasia, the state of knowing what is right, but failing to act on it. The person ruled by akrasia is not evil, but weak. He is overcome, not by ignorance, but by desire. He regrets what he has done, but could not stop himself. Sound familiar? Unlike the truly vicious person who harms without remorse, the one who suffers from acrasia still carries the burden of conscience. And because of this, he can grow. For Aristotle, the remedy is discipline, phronesis, or practical wisdom, repetition, habit, the crafting of virtue. Through effort and education, one could strengthen the will and eventually become the person they strive to be. This process isn't fast, nor is it glamorous. It's a quiet, persistent reshaping of the self. It's brushing your teeth with the same hand that once struck out in anger. It's pausing before speaking the same sentence you once shouted. It's noticing the difference between reacting and responding. But even Aristotle, with his rational optimism, underestimated the depth of the split. St. Paul pushed further. He recognized that reason alone could not bridge the gap. Knowledge alone is not enough. Even discipline, at times, fails. The desire to do good is present, but the power to carry it out is often not. Human effort, though noble, is insufficient. Paul called this struggle the war between flesh and spirit. He insisted that only divine grace, not reason or rules, could heal that rift. In psychological terms, we might call this grace integration, the reintegration of the fragmented self, the process of unifying the many scattered parts of our being, will, body, spirit, history, into something whole. This is what depth psychology has attempted to do under other names: healing the inner split, addressing the disowned shadow, restoring communication between conscious and unconscious layers. The first step is awareness, the willingness to see what we do, to feel the sting of guilt not as a curse, but as a call. That ache in the heart when we fall short is not just pain, it's direction. It points to the life we long for. We must remember, struggling with sin or misalignment is not failure. It is evidence of life. The real danger begins when the struggle ends, when we stop noticing, stop caring, stop trying. That is when conscience dulls. That is when the soul hardens. To feel torn is human. To wrestle is sacred. And in that wrestling, we may yet find grace, because even when we miss the mark, the fact that we aimed at all, that we wanted to aim, that we felt the sting of missing, means something inside us still remembers the target. There is a quiet war that rages inside us, a war without soldiers, without banners, without explosions, but no less real. It unfolds in silence, in late-night decisions, in words withheld or spoken in anger, in habits we can't break and truths we can't face. It is the inner war between the parts of ourselves we like to show the world and the parts we wish didn't exist. And perhaps nothing reveals this conflict more clearly than the shadow. In the language of depth psychology, the shadow is everything in us that we refuse to acknowledge. The dark impulses, the selfish motives, the hidden envy, the jealousy, the cruelty we deny. These aspects don't disappear just because we disown them. They go underground, into the unconscious, and from there, they act. Carl Jung famously said, "What you resist not only persists, it grows." When we repress the unacceptable parts of ourselves, they find other ways to surface. They slip into our moods, our projections, our relationships. The shadow leaks out in sarcasm, in resentment, in addiction, in prejudice, in irrational anger. And most often, we don't recognize it as ours. We call it them. That person, the problem out there. This is the essence of projection. Instead of seeing the difficult trait within ourselves, we unconsciously assign it to someone else. The person who annoys us most often mirrors something unresolved in our own psyche. A man who is deeply competitive may despise arrogant people. A woman who is insecure might label others as needy or dramatic. We fear what we haven't reconciled in ourselves, and what we fear, we attack. This is why self-knowledge is so difficult. It's not just a matter of intellectual honesty, it's emotional courage. It requires us to see things in ourselves we've worked hard to avoid. And even more than seeing, it asks us to take responsibility for them, to stop blaming others, to admit, that wasn't just a reaction, it was mine. That anger wasn't about them, it came from something I carry. This confrontation with the shadow can feel humiliating at first, like removing a mask we've worn for years. We fear what it means. Does this make me a bad person? Does this mean I'm not who I thought I was? But that fear is based on a misunderstanding. The shadow is not evil, it's just hidden. It's not proof of our wickedness, it's proof of our incompleteness. As Jung put it, I must have a dark side if I am to be whole. Denying the shadow makes us less human, not more moral. To be fully alive, we must face the full spectrum of our nature. What makes the shadow so dangerous isn't that it exists, it's that we refuse to own it. When left in the unconscious, it becomes autonomous. It starts to act on its own. It shapes our decisions without us realizing it. This is how people become trapped in cycles, repeating the same mistake, choosing the same kind of partner, falling into the same conflict over and over again. Not because they are doomed, but because they are unaware. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The tragedy is not the presence of the shadow, but the refusal to engage with it. And the first clue that the shadow is active: emotional overreaction, irritation that feels disproportionate, criticism that feels oddly personal, idealization that borders on fantasy. These are signs that something inside you has been triggered. The outer event is real, but the intensity is yours. It belongs to an older wound, a buried fear, or a denied desire. This is where reflection begins. The moment we pause and ask, why did that affect me so deeply? What part of me felt threatened, exposed, or challenged? It's not about excusing bad behavior or becoming passive. It's about reclaiming your own story, owning your inner world instead of outsourcing it. Healing begins here. To face the shadow is to interrupt the cycle. It's to look at the emotion rather than be swept away by it. It's to ask not, why are they like this? But why do I react this way? With each moment of honesty, a piece of the unconscious becomes conscious. And with that awareness comes choice. It is important to understand, this work is not instant. The shadow has been hiding for years, often since childhood. It was born when parts of us were told they were unacceptable. Don't cry. Don't be angry. Don't be loud. Be a good boy. Be a perfect girl. And so, we split. The parts that won approval we kept. The parts that were punished, we buried. But they never disappeared. They simply waited. Jung called the process of confronting the shadow the beginning of individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole person. Not a perfect person, but an integrated one. The goal is not to be flawless. It's to be honest. It is to unite the conflicting parts into a larger self, one capable of carrying complexity without collapse. This integration doesn't mean giving the shadow control. It means recognizing its message. Behind every outburst is a longing. Behind every resentment, a wound. The shadow doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in symptoms. The more we repress it, the louder it becomes. But if we listen, if we engage, it can become a guide. In fact, many of our deepest strengths lie dormant within the shadow. Qualities like assertiveness, sensuality, creativity, power. These are often shamed early in life and pushed down. We call them bad, not because they are, but because someone once told us so. Reclaiming the shadow often means reclaiming our vitality, but doing so requires humility, the willingness to say, I don't fully know myself. It requires sitting with discomfort, with contradiction, with uncertainty, and above all, it requires compassion. For others, yes, but also for yourself. Because this work will surface things you don't like, and unless you meet them with gentleness, you'll just bury them again. So, how do we begin? We begin by noticing, by treating strong emotional reactions not as accidents, but as invitations, by tracking the patterns in our relationships, by questioning the stories we tell about other people, and by asking again and again, what part of this is mine? Eventually, we begin to recognize the difference between who we truly are and who we were taught to be, between our conditioned self and our authentic self, between habit and essence. And that is when real freedom becomes possible. Not the freedom to do whatever we want, but the freedom to see clearly, to act with choice, to live with integrity, to stop being run by ghosts we've never named. Facing the shadow is not easy. It can be painful. It will challenge your identity. It will expose your contradictions. But it is the only way to become whole, to live in truth, to stop running. Because the longer we run from ourselves, the more fragmented we become. And no amount of success, approval, or control will fill that inner emptiness. Only self-acceptance can do that. Only integration can bring peace. And that begins the moment you turn inward, not to judge, not to condemn, but to listen. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your myth. The story of sin is often told as a tragic fall, a cosmic failure that marks humanity's descent from grace. The narrative of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is the quintessential tale. One moment of disobedience, one bite of forbidden fruit, and the perfect harmony of paradise shatters. We inherit the weight of this original sin, a stain that separates us from the divine and marks us as flawed, fallen creatures. But what if this fall was not only a catastrophe, but also a profound beginning? What if, paradoxically, the very act that caused separation also opened the door to salvation and growth? This paradox lies at the heart of what Christian theology calls felix culpa, the happy fault. It is the idea that Adam's sin, while tragic, was also the precondition for the incarnation of Christ and, consequently, for the redemption of humanity. The fall made possible a journey of transformation, a movement from innocence through suffering into a deeper, more conscious state of being. In this view, sin is not merely a moral failing, it is a catalyst for awakening. The concept of felix culpa invites us to reconsider sin not only as a rupture, but also as an alchemical process within the soul. Alchemy, with its ancient symbols of death and rebirth, provides a powerful metaphor for psychological transformation. Just as base metals must be broken down and purified in fire to become gold, so too must the soul undergo trials and fractures to emerge whole and luminous. Sin, with all its pain and disruption, can be seen as the dark night that precedes spiritual dawn. This alchemical journey is mirrored in the process of individuation described by Carl Jung, the lifelong psychological task of becoming a whole person. Individuation involves integrating the shadow, confronting one's limitations, and reconciling conflicting parts of the self. It is through the experience of failing, falling, and facing the consequences of our actions that we come to a fuller understanding of who we are. The fall is not a point of no return, but a step in a spiral staircase ascending toward wholeness. Adam's fall can thus be reimagined as an archetypal story of human awakening. The loss of Eden represents the loss of naive innocence, the moment when the self becomes aware of its freedom and responsibility. With this freedom comes the burden of choice and the risk of error. The story reminds us that true growth involves stepping out of comfort and certainty, risking disconnection in order to forge a new identity. In psychological terms, this corresponds to the painful recognition of the fragmented self, the moment when illusions about ourselves are shattered and we face the complexity of our nature. This confrontation with sin or misalignment is the raw material for transformation. It compels us to reckon with our imperfections and to cultivate humility. The journey from sin to salvation is the journey from fragmentation to integration. This journey also entails atonement, a term derived from the idea of becoming at one again. Atonement is not simply paying a price for wrongdoing. It is the restoration of harmony within the self and between self and other. It requires acknowledgement, responsibility, and the willingness to change. Psychological healing, much like spiritual redemption, depends on this willingness to make amends and to forgive, not only others, but oneself. From this perspective, sin becomes a kind of spiritual medicine. It is painful, yes, but it awakens conscience and spurs growth. The experience of guilt, once understood properly, is not a burden, but a guidepost, a signal that parts of the self remain connected to the good, even when behavior falls short. It is the call to reorient, to return to the path of wholeness. This does not mean that sin should be romanticized or excused. Rather, it means recognizing its place within a larger framework of human development. The recognition of failure is essential for the cultivation of virtues, such as courage, patience, and compassion. It is through the very experience of breaking that we learn the value of healing. The soul's alchemy is a paradox of loss and gain. Like the phoenix rising from ashes, the self must be broken down before it can be reborn. This is the painful but necessary path to authenticity. It is not about achieving perfection, but embracing imperfection with honesty and grace. Importantly, this transformation is never a solitary act. Just as Adam and Eve's story is intertwined with the promise of redemption through Christ, so too is the psychological journey supported by connection, whether to community, tradition, or a transcendent source of meaning. Healing is relational. It requires opening to others and to the deeper currents of existence beyond the ego's confines. In contemporary psychology, this can be seen in therapeutic processes that emphasize acceptance and integration rather than denial or suppression of undesirable parts. Healing involves welcoming the dark alongside the light, the painful memories alongside the joyful ones. It is a reweaving of the fragmented self into a coherent and resilient whole. The recognition that sin, misalignment, failure, fracture, is the very ground from which growth arises, challenges the simplistic dichotomies of good and evil, success and failure, purity and defilement. It invites a more nuanced understanding of human nature, one that embraces complexity and contradiction. We are not defined by our missteps alone, but by how we respond to them. Each failure carries within it the seed of renewal. Each fall is an invitation to rise. The story of Felix Culpa reminds us that sometimes the deepest wounds become the openings for the deepest healing. The sin that seemed to condemn us may, in fact, be the sin that saves. The journey toward wholeness marks the culmination of the soul's long and arduous path. It is not a quest for unattainable purity or faultless perfection. Rather, it is the courageous and compassionate embrace of all that we are. The light alongside the shadow, strength alongside vulnerability, triumph alongside failure. This distinction is subtle but vital. Purity demands an impossible ideal. Wholeness demands acceptance and integration. For millennia, spiritual traditions have underscored the importance of confession, repentance, forgiveness, and reconciliation. These are not mere ritualistic acts or moral checklists, but profound spiritual practices that lead us toward healing and transformation. Confession is the radical act of unveiling, bringing to light those hidden parts of ourselves that we have denied or suppressed. It requires immense courage, humility, and honesty. When we confess, we do not merely admit wrongdoing to an external authority. We name what is unconscious, shadowy, or broken within. The illumination this brings is the first step toward reconciliation, the reuniting of fragmented parts of the self. Repentance, the Greek metanoia, goes beyond remorse or regret. It is a fundamental turning of the heart and mind, a deep reorientation of one's entire way of being. It means stepping away from old patterns, illusions, and false selves, and turning toward truth, love, and authentic presence. This is neither swift nor easy. It is a lifelong process, a continual dying and rising, a constant renewal. The path is rarely linear. It twists and turns, with moments of progress interspersed with relapses and doubt. Psychologically, this process is mirrored in the work of therapy and inner growth. Healing begins when unconscious material, the shadow, the disowned parts, is brought into conscious awareness. Naming, owning, and accepting these parts is the foundation of integration. It requires a gentle but unwavering willingness to face discomfort, to dismantle defenses, and to develop compassion, especially for oneself. In this acceptance lies the paradox of grace. Grace, whether understood as divine favor or as an emergent quality of the psyche, is the mysterious force that welcomes our brokenness without condemnation. It allows us to step into our shadows without fear, to embrace what we have long hidden or rejected. Grace transforms our wounds into gateways, openings through which we can move toward wholeness. A key element of becoming whole is discernment, the ability to distinguish between reactive, habitual patterns and authentic impulses arising from wisdom and presence. As self-awareness deepens, we learn to pause before acting, to observe the inner movements that drive us. We come to see the difference between acting out of fear, pain, or egoic reactivity, and acting from grounded, thoughtful intention. Aristotle called this practical wisdom phronesis, the cultivated habit of choosing well in complex, ambiguous circumstances. Cultivating phronesis requires sustained effort and mindfulness. It means choosing patience when anger arises, empathy when judgment threatens, presence when distraction beckons. These choices, repeated over time, gradually reshape our character and the quality of our lives. Yet the journey to wholeness is rarely smooth or straightforward. We face setbacks, moments of despair, and the temptation to revert to old familiar patterns. The shadow never fully disappears. It remains a constant companion, reminding us of our vulnerability and imperfection. But with persistence and patience, the distance between who we want to be and who we are narrows. Our inner world becomes more cohesive. Central to this process is reconciliation, not only within ourselves, but with the world and others. We are relational beings, interconnected with community, nature, and the greater whole. Healing the self involves repairing relationships, restoring trust, and embracing vulnerability and authenticity. The importance of community is a thread woven throughout spiritual traditions. True confession and repentance typically occur within the context of community, where accountability, support, and acceptance can nurture growth. Isolation hardens the soul. Connection softens it. Through authentic relationships, we encounter mirrors reflecting our light and shadow, helping us grow in self-awareness and compassion. Ultimately, freedom arises not from the absence of difficulty or imperfection, but from the courage to live authentically amidst them. It is freedom to embrace complexity, contradiction, and ambiguity without collapse. It is the freedom to love oneself and others in fullness, without pretense or illusion. This vision dismantles the rigid dichotomies that have historically constrained self-understanding: good versus evil, pure versus sinful, success versus failure. It invites us to hold paradox, complexity, and nuance as the true nature of human existence. We are not defined by our mistakes or missteps, but by our response to them. Each fall carries a seed of renewal. Each failure beckons us to rise stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. The story of Felix Culpa, the happy fault, reminds us that sometimes the deepest wounds become the openings for the most profound healing. The sin that seemed to condemn us may be the very sin that saves us. It is the paradox at the heart of the human condition. Brokenness can be the doorway to wholeness. Loss can become gain. Imperfection can birth grace. To become whole is to embrace all that we are, not despite our flaws, but because of them. It is an act of extraordinary courage and grace, and the truest path to freedom. This process, though deeply personal, also has collective implications. When individuals pursue wholeness, they contribute to the healing of communities, societies, and the planet. Fragmented selves tend to perpetuate fragmentation in the world, while integrated beings can serve as vessels of compassion, justice, and renewal. In practical terms, the work of becoming whole involves ongoing practices of self-reflection, mindfulness, and compassionate action. It asks us to cultivate inner listening, to notice our emotional triggers, and to learn from them rather than react blindly. It encourages us to build habits of kindness toward ourselves and others, and to seek connection rather than isolation. At times, the path may require forgiveness, not only of others, but of ourselves. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as condoning wrongdoing, but in truth, it is a release from the burden of bitterness and resentment. It is a freeing act that opens space for healing and peace. Moreover, becoming whole requires that we hold both the saint and the sinner within ourselves, that we acknowledge our capacity for both light and shadow without shame or denial. This integration frees us from the impossible demand to be good all the time, allowing room for growth, mistakes, and transformation. In this way, wholeness is not a static state but a dynamic, evolving process. It is a lifelong dance between acceptance and aspiration, surrender and effort, loss and gain. As we walk this path, we gradually embody a deeper truth: that our worth is not measured by our purity or perfection, but by our authenticity and integrity. We discover that our humanity, in all its complexity, is worthy of love and belonging. And so, the greatest act of courage we can undertake is to become fully ourselves, whole, flawed, beautiful, and